Hi, everybody. My name is Monica Luzon. I am a writer, editor, and translator. I do Spanish English translations, and I consume a lot of translated works. My let's see, writing. I do speculative fiction and poetry, as well as non-speculative pieces. And then for the editing side of things, I'm acquiring editor for the Dread Machine. I also have I co-edited the anthology Darkness Blooms, which Dread Machine is putting out on May 1st, and pre-orders are available, which is exciting. Um, and then for translation, I've done a lot of translations. A couple of them have been published. A lot of them live in the shadows still. My I've got a couple of translations or one in Constellation magazine, one in Apex magazine, and I had one in an anthology that the Pittsburgh Science Fiction Society did, Triangulation Energy. And I've worked with authors on a couple of different continents at this point, and I think I'll stop there and let you go.
All right. I'm Connie Covington. I write as CD Covington. I have degrees in German and linguistics, masters in both, and I think about language far too much. I mean, that's kind of like my degree and my training. Um, I have translated one piece. I'm still trying to find a home for it. Uh, it's a short story that won awards here in Germany, and none of the English language markets are interested in it that I've sent it to. So we'll see. Which is something that I wanted to talk about a little bit later because it's partly a little style of the
Hmm.
thing. What else? I read and write English and German. I'm learning Norwegian on Duolingo. Not really useful. Um, my training in linguistics, because I focused on Germanic languages, included a lot of all the dead languages: Old Norse, Old English, Old Saxon, Gothic, sort of Middle High German. Um, so I can sort of read those and translate, and I translated a lot. I mean, basically, learning a dead language is all translation. Your homework is here, read this passage, translate it, uh, and that's always fun and interesting. I love that. Oh, we're on another panel again in like 2 hours together. Ooh,
I know.
so let us not have the same panel twice. Because I'm like, I'm going to talk about my this really great translation. Oh wait, this feminist translation. That's later. That's later.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, the feminist stuff need to bucket that one.
I'm like, oh no, I want to talk about this one because like there's so many really terrible translations of epic poetry and so many bad, poor, terrible translations. But that's a different panel. Um, yeah. So that's who I am. Not very exciting. The topic we're talking about is what makes a work a good candidate for translation, and I think a lot of it depends on so many factors. So Kian wants to know who decides what gets translated, and that's the publisher, really. Like anybody can translate something as long as it's legal, but if it gets published, that's well, we're not going to pay you
Hmm.
because the publishers they got to pay the author and the translator, and they don't want to do that because it costs extra. But so what makes things I think this is this is our first thing in the morning panel. I don't think either of us is awake yet. Um, one of the things that I think makes a candidate makes a work harder to translate is if it's really, really uh, steeped in the culture. I mean, everything is steeped in its own culture, but if so, I'm like an anime fan, and there's a lot of anime that I love that I would not have understood if it was the first anime I ever watched because
Hmm.
it plays so much into the tropes, it's so much into Japanese culture, and like there's this one Showa, it's the Rakugo show where it's this Japanese storytelling form that is dying out, really, I think. It's very limited, but it's this very particular style of storytelling that was popular until I don't know, TV came out, I guess. And I would not have gotten that if that was the first anime I ever watched. It's amazing, it's wonderful, and it's all so much about storytelling, and I think as writers we could all appreciate that. But
My friends have been recommending that one to me.
it's so
I need to
good.
watch that one. But like all of a sudden people were recommending it to me like last week, and I'm like, okay, I need to remember this one for the because it sounded really interesting, and everyone's like, oh, it's
Yeah,
great.
it's so good. It's so depressing and it's so Japanese. And like it's been I think it even has an official not only fan sub, I think it's got like a real sub.
Hmm.
So you can watch it on um like Netflix maybe, I'm not sure. Um
It's yeah, we probably have it on of like something here. I think my
yeah.
friends may be watching it on Crunchyroll.
Oh yeah, it's probably on Crunchyroll.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Can I jump? I'm sorry. Go
yeah, yeah. So I'm just gonna keep rambling about the show and how amazing it is.
ahead. We can come back to that if we need to. I was gonna say for what makes a work a good candidate for translation. Where was the original question? That
In the chat
yeah, there
here.
it is. Yeah, yeah. So for just so I guess this is the slow brain, the early morning brain right now, because it's 4 a.m. here. So for who
Mm,
decides what gets translated, I think that is a multi-layered question because the publishers do have a lot of impact on that, but then there's also people who might do fan translations or like you were mentioning, or like in my case, I for my translations, I got my start cold emailing authors and
mm,
being like, look, I really like your work. I think it should reach English speaking audiences. I want to help you out with this. Um, and that was me taking on that work kind of pro bono with an agreement that if we got any money, we'd split it. There's just not a lot of markets out there that take short translated science or speculative fiction, and it's been that also pay. That's that also
mhm,
pay. I know in one of the earlier panels yesterday, I guess it is now, Neil Clark and Yiling Wang were talking about the lack of speculative fiction markets out there right now that actually pay the translators, and they're right. Like
mhm,
it's very rare to like in a perfect world, we would have publications paying translator and author equally, and that's very important because of the division of because there's a lot of labor that goes into the act of translating, and a translator's time is valuable. A translator's time is money, just like it is for an author, which is why I also am like very big on the authors need to get paid for their stuff. Like if they're writing creatively and they're pouring their hearts into this work, they should be getting paid for that time that they're putting into it because they could be using that time at their day job or making a wage somewhere else some other way. Um, but for anyway, so going back to deciding does the translations, I've started to have authors reach out to me and solicit translations, but I'm still reading a ton and going through particularly short fiction because I can consume a lot of it and get a taste of a lot of styles. I've been reading a lot of short speculative fiction in Spanish from different parts of the world, and then reaching out to the authors and saying, "Hey, I like your work." Or in one case, I reached out to a magazine. I was like, "Hey, I love your magazine. I'm trying to figure out how to contact these authors." Um, but so when I'm having authors solicit me, or when people are soliciting me for translation, I do a thing where I charge by the hour. I charge up front or not upfront, but like I make the rates like I try to be clear about what my rates are up front,
mhm,
and I also do a sample translation. That's the big thing is I do if they have a piece they want me to translate, I'll do a sample, and if they like it, then I'll go like a book or a longer story. I'll do a sample of it and or a couple hundred words if it's a short story, and make sure that we're on the same vibe because
mhm,
I have had people reach out to me and ask for translations, but the or ask for like proofreading of translations, but there've been I have run into situations where the cultural differences have been too much, like our per like how our business practices work. Um, some places just some creators or some authors may just want to pay you a lump sum up front and they don't want to have that conversation necessarily,
Hmm.
which is it was a kind of a it's kind of a weird situation if that happens. It's not very common because usually people wanted to like piecemeal the money out so they can save for it. Um, but anyway, I'm losing my train of thought here. But for yeah, so for picking who translates, I think the translators do have a say. The authors also get a say because I have been commissioned to do a translation like for an author, and then they've gone on to get that published, and or to go work with a literary agent and that sort of thing. And I'm just like not in those conversations,
Hmm.
um, like as an intermediary in the same way that I am when I'm translating short stories and sending them out or soliciting authors and like taking an active role in helping get those pieces pushed out. Um, sorry, I know
Hmm.
I'm taking up. I've done a monologue.
I know.
Um,
Yeah, the story that I've translated, I reached out to the author and said, "Hi, I read your story. I liked it. Can I translate it?" And um, she's like, they were like, "Yeah, that's great. That's fine." Um, it's currently sitting in the queue at FNSF, and
I wanted it
when
to.
that'll come out of the queue, FNSF is very, very slow right now, apparently.
Yeah.
Um,
We did figure out, we being myself and some folks at on the Dread Machine, like we have a Discord server for Dread Machine, and it's a very active community, and people are in other parts of the speculative fiction community. And someone was telling us that part of the slowness seemed to be because the submission management system wasn't pushing stuff back into the queue and this is a sorry, this is a tangent. When the if a reader like normally when a reader leaves a publication, like in a perfect world, you'd want the stories that are assigned to them to go back into the pool for other readers to grab, but that wasn't happening. I think that's been fixed now.
oh,
But there's all it also just depends on who it's assigned to and how long that takes. Um, and also how long stuff sits with the managing or with the editor who's making the final call. Because I definitely have like there's definitely stuff in the Dread Machine queue that I've passed up and it's sitting with the one my my co-editor so she can make the final call on whether we're going to spend money on the piece or not. But
mm,
yeah,
yeah,
sorry, this is definitely deviating from what makes a
yeah,
work a good translation.
yeah.
Um, for
It's
me, if I'm looking for pieces that to translate, usually I'm looking for something that just I'm interested in. Like I read it, it hooks me, it's a good story. And then I also think about whether I've read stories like that with that same narrative structure
mhm,
or similar plots or similar lenses already in English. So if I've seen stuff that magazines have been putting out that it's in translation and it's a similar lens, I might not necessarily if it's like the same like it seems like a similar story or a similar perspective, I might not be as inclined to try to translate that. Whereas if I want a story that surprises me.
mhm.
And what about you?
Um, the story I picked was picked it partly because it won awards last year, and it's like, oh well, it's won awards. It's maybe more likely to get picked up because hey, it's this award-winning German science fiction. That does not help
Mhm.
yet. But I think part of the reason with that is the one rejection we got that had any feedback on it was we wanted to know where it was what was happening sooner. It's
Mhm.
very slow uh, build up to what's going on. It's like a 6,800 word story, which is not short, and it's not till about halfway through that you kind of get this what's happening.
Mhm.
It's like the first 1,000 words or so are the narrator is clinically depressed, and there's some really great, really disgusting imagery in it. Uh, like this cake that has turned into mold, and it's super gross, but very vivid and very disgusting. But it's a kind
Um,
it's
I
got that sort of it's kind of cyberpunk, which I
Okay.
guess isn't really dead yet. It's definitely not dead in Germany. Germany
It's
still loves
definitely not dead
cyberpunk.
here.
Okay, like I don't read cyberpunk much,
There was
but
a video game that I think may spark some renewed
oh
interest
yeah,
recently.
yeah. The author is non-binary, and a lot of the it's kind of a simulation type thing. We go like into the Wired or whatever you want to call it, um, and it's kind of a metaphor for non-binariness in a way, and it's just it's such an interesting story, and it's so different than a lot of other German science fiction, which is one of the things because like German science fiction right now is still kind of 70s era in the US, like kind of still a little bit pulpy, but not all other, but there's more um what's it called? More queer writers coming in and more of that being published, but the most popular thing is still fucking Periodan, and that's like this kind of Star Trek-ish thing that started in the 50s, and there's like 3,000 Perry Rodan books,
Oh,
and it's just so many. And like every German science fiction writer, well, not every, but all of the big ones have written some, and that's how they got their start. Or, oh, look, it's a special Perry Rodan by this big name author. It's like, please, can we have something other than this?
it
Another
kind
like Star Wars rehash.
it kind of makes me think of Sherlock
Mm,
when people are writing Sherlock stories. Like one of the things I do is analyses of like multi-author Kickstarter campaigns every year. And I've learned that there's one person in New Hampshire who has figured out the perfect system for churning out a new Sherlock anthology every quarter or every trimester. And the Kickstarters always succeed because it's a likable character, like who doesn't like Sherlock? And I'm just fascinated because for me, reading like I need a little bit more variety in like who I'm reading about, right? Like I feel like maybe the German the series like how you were saying, oh, another one. It's like oh, I'm like when I look at Kickstarter, I'm like, oh, another Sherlock one. Like I'm the guy running it, very smart, like niche he's carved out there. But
mm,
I feel like I have that same tangential reaction.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
Before we keep going, I should mention, since we do have people in the audience, if you guys have questions for us, this is very informal, and we are just flying off the seat of our pants. I think that's a
Hmm.
phrase. If it's not, it is now.
Buy the seat of our pants.
Yes.
I speak English. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really bad at colloquialisms in Spanish and in English, and one of the translations that I was asked to like do that I ended up not doing, the author wanted me to help translate it was a very rhyming based story. And I was anyone who knows me very well knows that like rhyming heavy prose is not my jams. I don't really like rhyming poetry also. Like when I'm reading submissions for the Dread Machine, um, if I see stuff rhymes, I'm just like, oh, because usually the author focuses more on the rhyme than they do on the content of the story. Um, and I know that I'm not a good translator for that specific there are other translators out there who are probably great with like the carrying the rhyming from one language in a story to another. Like the characters every time they spoke it was rhyming and I was like
Mm,
I'm not gonna be able to do this justice. I know that's not what you want to hear. But
hmm.
that one was not but I was also thinking about with that one like where would I go? Like who would be like publishing it, and the author said that they had someone in their home country like who wanted to publish it as like an English story there, and it's like okay, like that makes a lot more sense because this would not break into US markets or like British markets, I don't think even,
Mm,
or other parts
yeah.
of the English speaking world.
Yeah, yeah. So Kian asks, how do we see differences in structure in other languages as compared to US English? German structure is very similar because it's still Western and follows the similar, the little triangle or the little exposition arc, those all the little things we learned about in school in Anglophone countries anyway. And um, you can see a lot more narrative difference in Japanese and in anime, which I have 2 years of anime fan Japanese that I took in 20 years ago. So like my Japanese is basically non-existent at this point. But I think that the popularity of anime and manga kind of show that people are interested in and able to read other narrative structures, and publishing just kind of needs to catch up with that.
Oh.
So, oh, people don't want to read a book that's just boring and Kishoten Ketsu or Setsu? Kishoten Setsu Ketsu. Um, the kind of four act that it's
Mhm.
one that's not like conflict. And I mean, it is conflict, but it's a different kind of conflict. But it's like, let's be conflict on every page. Yes, Kishoten Ketsu. Yes, thank you, Kian.
That's making me think, I just finished reading yesterday. I went to the library, my library had just gotten a new one-shot manga by the author who I'm not gonna remember the name. I'm really bad at remembering names of manga authors. I need to do better with that. The guy who did Chainsaw Man did a one shot called, I think it's called Look Back or Don't Look. It was like Look Back or
Yeah, I think I've heard of that, and I've heard it was really, whew,
I just read it, and it was very like the first like half narratively. I was like, oh, this is like I'm hooked. This is excellent. And then the second half, it got really wild structurally. Like even for manga, like there were like time shifts, and then it was like a little bit of almost I guess like Japanese magical realism with like then it's kind of like dimension like temporal spatial shifts as well. It is not a light read. I
mm-hmm.
picked it, I was like, oh, this will be like a light manga because I didn't really read the back where it said it was by the person who did Chainsaw Man.
Oops.
I was like, oh, it'll be a nice, light, fluffy, like feel good. And I was like reading, I was like, I think I might cry.
Yeah,
But it was good.
yeah.
But it was like the structure, narrative structure was just different than um what I have encountered most commonly in translated manga that makes it into my library system. For the span on the Spanish language side, I've also found that there's a lot of issue with the pacing and the demand for pacing from US audiences and US editors, especially for short fiction, because a lot of short fiction, like in the US has the structure of like you need to have a hook, you need to have the stakes clear within the first page or two. And when I'm reading some of these stories that I translate, the stakes may not necessarily be clear because like the priorities in the narrative structure are different. Like you have to read and like develop and watch things unroll. And then like as that through that process, you get the stakes. They're just not in the like spoon-fed way, I guess maybe, or the oh, I'm gonna come up with a really bad metaphor. I really am. Um,
Spoon fed. I like spoon fed because
spoon-fed,
that
yeah, like
takes all what they
yeah,
want.
it is, and it's a very like if you look at I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy reading the finalists for different awards, like in the short fiction categories, like around the world. Um, Especially like in Spain, seeing what gets into the final prizes for or the finalists for the different prizes that the Spanish Science Fiction Society Portico offers. The It's interesting seeing what makes their finalists for the year versus like what makes the Nebula finalists in the US. And like
Mm.
I feel like it's very there are always different perspectives, but there are certain key elements, like certain key emotional hooks, um, or certain key like putting things at this point in the story and this point in the story, like that those checklists that seem to consistently get unlock the nebula level story. Like if you write a story, like I think it's possible to write a story and be like, this may be a solid Nebula contender because it hit these certain check marks. And I
Mhm.
feel like the same thing can be said, I guess, with like other awards in different languages too. It's just those checklists are different, and so writing or translating. I don't think we really have that many translating awards. I've never thought about that.
I don't,
Go ahead.
yeah, I don't think there are any. I mean, I know that the Seiyun Awards, the Japanese ones, have a best work in translation every year.
Hmm.
It's translated into Japanese as opposed to,
Yeah,
right,
the
I guess the
Spanish one.
Seiyun Awards wouldn't judge English language.
Yeah,
It translated from
Portugal has
Japanese.
the categories too, where it's like the best for the I'm blanking on the word, the Notice Awards. They also have like
Mhm.
best translated into Spanish awards or like category. Sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, no, no, that was basically it. It's like
Okay. I'm
the
making a note of like one of the things I've been doing on the translation panels as like gaps are identified in
mm,
the like translate like in the space for translators, like what are the difficulties that we've run into, what are the spaces that are missing for speculative translations, like, and what are the opportunities that translations and translators don't have that more like regular writing does.
mhm. Yeah, that is point. I don't think I I don't know if there's enough literature translated out of other languages into English in
Mhm.
science fiction anyway to have an award because there just doesn't seem to be. Like Neil Clark was saying yesterday on that panel that, or one of the panels, so I was on
Mhm.
one with him, and there's the one after that, that he tries to get one translation in every issue of Clark's World, but they seem to be largely out of Chinese because that's like the biggest non-English, well, I won't say it's the biggest non-English language market right now, but it's definitely the most, I don't know, when it gets translated the most, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's because there's a lot of demand and there's a lot of
Mm,
venues in China, like a lot of science fiction publications to translate that are publishing and that are publishing in China in Chinese so that there's the volume for it. Whereas, like, I think I was on a panel once for different flights of Foundry, and there was someone who translated German was saying that the German speculative fiction world is like very, very small. And like,
mhm,
and you were even saying that with the series with the different like all the best-selling science fiction authors have been like written a book in that series at
mhm,
some point.
mhm. Yeah, it's, there's smaller market. There's like a lot of there's a uh, explicitly queer science fiction quarterly, I think, in German, and it's I don't even know how you get into that. I don't know if you have to know the editor. I don't know if the submission process. I don't even know how it works. I don't know how to submit works in German. I don't know how to do that because there just isn't like a submission grinder for German science fiction markets because there's fewer, I guess. I don't know.
Is there a professional society? Like I know probably not for like translators, but like do they have a like a SIFWA equivalent?
Yeah, you have to be a German. If you're writing German, and I'm like, well, I don't write in German, so I can't join your club. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's true.
I'm going to a convention next month here in Berlin, and Mary Robinette's going to be there as one of the um, visiting guests, and it's just everybody knows each other already. I'm like, how do I get into this circle?
I feel like attending these kinds of conventions helps a lot with that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot has been because I've like the speculative fiction scene in Spain versus in Latin America is different in that there's more bureaucracy, I think, or like a more organized structure in Spain because they have the well-established speculative fiction society. And then like I was talking with an author in Argentina and I think I was asking if they and I was asking about like professional like SIFWA equivalents in Argentina because like I've looked for that, and she was saying that there isn't really any organization that advocates for the authors getting paid themselves, so much less like translators getting paid. Um, and I know Portico has a thing with the Italian Speculative Fiction Society, whose name I'm completely forgetting, where they'll translate. I think they translate the award winners for each awards, like the top short story. Each of them translates it to their respective languages and then pushes it out in the Science Fiction Society's anthology each year. And that like there's a lot more structure there, but even I guess one of the challenges with translation is getting paid and the amount of money. Like they also like the
Right.
authors struggle with that. There's just not enough money going around.
There's never enough money going around. Yeah. Because like
Yeah.
the story I translated, I haven't been paid for yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only going to get paid when it sells.
Yep.
And I've divided it 70-30, where I get the bulk of the um, payment
Mm-hmm.
is they've already gotten paid for though for it in German. And I did
Yes.
extra work and been doing elective footwork. But it's like 70% of $100 is still not much.
No.
It's
No.
like,
Yeah. I have a.
yay.
I'm sorry.
It's like if it was a per word rate, it would have already been paid something like, I don't know, $500
Mm-hmm.
if it was on a per word rate.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah. I I've been approaching my translations because all the solicited stuff I'm not getting paid up front. My incentive to do the translation well and to do it and help the author find a home for it is that um I'll try to find a home for it in a paying market, and I won't stop until that I find a home for it. But that does mean I do have a catalog now of translated works that I've done like taken on pro bono with the like
mhm,
I might make money off of it, I might not, but I'm using it. I guess I'm using that as like a also as a networking tool and trying to build goodwill.
mhm,
Because I think because I've had opportunities from my very first translation sale opened up a lot of doors and a lot more attention, and people actually started reaching out to me asking me to translate stuff because they really liked the one translation I'd done. And I got very lucky that that one was a commissioned one. I never would have like stumbled across that on my own probably.
mhm,
And the so I guess like the doors that like I'm doing the stuff that's like me reaching out. That is it's an investment in it's like it's part of my long term many year plan
mhm.
just to like
Yeah.
try and get a catalog out there and get help. It's not so much like I guess being a translator also you have to decide how much because or how much especially of speculative fiction how much you want to contribute to the community or the rest
Mhm,
of the writing editing translating community in the world because you do a really important like you're performing a very valuable service a lot of the time it's going under the radar because the pieces aren't being published, but like you're, or if they are being published, they may not have a huge reach, or they may not, you just may not get paid well. And
mhm,
one of the things, if you're choosing a work to translate, is you have to think about, will you be proud of the contribution that you will be taking with this work, this commission you're taking on, or with this piece you're asking to translate? Um, like, will you be satisfied? Can you be satisfied with just knowing that you helped try to move the translation of speculative fiction, make that pool a little bit bigger, that pool for readers to access a little bit bigger in some way. Um, and one of the things I've been thinking about with my translations that haven't sold is like if I get enough that I haven't sold, I may just do an anthology of
mhm,
and do like some sort of crowdfunding campaign to make sure I can pay all the authors and then pay myself for the time that went into the projects. But I feel very strongly that these stories need to get out there, and if there's not going to be if I'm going to have a big like, if I end up with enough stuff that I'm proud of and I could fill an anthology, then why not? Like, why not put it
Hmm.
out there? There's definitely I feel that, like, there'd be room for that with not giving you more work, but I feel like I feel like there'd be appetite to see that from, like, from, German authors too, like
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Like one thing that I think makes it, I don't want to say difficult, but maybe more difficult, I don't know, harder is that I was at a sort of book conference last year in Berlin, and there was this group of authors from Hamburg who were all their like all of their stories are set in Hamburg. And for an American audience, you kind of be like, "What do I want to read about Hamburg? I don't know." It's like, does everybody want to read about New York and Chicago and LA? And do they? Do they? Or do they just have to because that's where all the stories are set? You
Mhm,
know, it's like, oh. And it's like kaiju, there was one, it was like this, an entire kaiju anthology set in Hamburg and like northern Germany. And it's like, that sounds like great fun. And people love kaiju. People love
mhm,
kaiju.
mhm,
And I was like, hey, like, here's my business card. We talk to me. I can, you know, if you talk to me, I can talk to small publishers or whatever, or figure out how to do a Kickstarter. Because
oh,
I think the English language market would have fun with this. Because who doesn't love a good
yeah.
monster destroys a city story?
Those do well, those anthologies do well on Kickstarter. I from my if you ever need the numbers on that, I have that in my spreadsheets.
Yeah, because people love it. There was recently a couple of different kaiju anthologies in English,
Mhm.
like
Yep.
originally in English, I mean, and Scalzi has his new kaiju book out, so it's like,
There's
you
definitely
know,
a market for it. It's just finding a
yeah,
publisher, right?
yeah, yeah, and people to pay the translators, people
Mhm.
to pay the authors. It's like, it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to translate an entire, anthology of short stories.
Only about kaiju? You don't want that?
Not by myself, because it would take forever, and but even so, it would be I like it's something I would love to do, but like, how do we get people to do that?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's something that would be successful. Like, yes,
Mhm.
kaiju, but Hamburg.
I think that place is a very important part of picking a translation,
Hmm.
and thinking about the audience's experiences, like, to what extent the audience has ever heard of a place or been
Hmm.
to a place. Like, for me, I'm trying to think of an example of a place I read a lot about and then finally went Paris. Paris was one where, like, or Barcelona, those were cities where, like, I read a lot of stories set in those cities. Never I had no idea, and then when I actually went, actually in New York too, since you mentioned New York, I did do, like, a thing where I was like, "Oh," like, because 'cause I'm not a huge fan of, like, of New York, I don't really it's a huge city, it has a lot of awesome food, a lot of things to offer, the Comic Con is great if you can swing tickets to go, however, it's just a lot, and I prefer not being surrounded by a lot all the time, but I did go up and do a trip to New York, um, with my partner. We went to all these places I had read about in books because I was like, "I've read about this, and now I actually care about that city. Now I wanna broaden like, or I wanna I'm not keen on going to New York, but there's all these experiences that I know about from books that I wanna go see." Um, and yeah, literary tourism is definitely like, you could create a whole field of literary tourism to go to Hamburg and look for kaiju places
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I
if you
mean,
had a project like that.
yeah. I mean, shit. There's this big anime nerd thing where you go to Tokyo and you're like, oh, here's this thing. Oh, here's what this is set. Oh, look, take my
Mhm.
cosplay picture. Or this scene happened. This famous scene.
Mhm.
And that's a thing.
Yeah.
And
Um,
why
sorry,
shouldn't that
real
be a
quick,
thing for Hamburg?
looking at the clock, we
Mhm.
have 10 minutes, so if there's any questions the audience wants to throw at us, like, we can keep we'll keep chatting, but we'll keep an eye on the chat too.
Yeah. Get the tourism board to sponsor our writing. That would be awesome.
Oh man.
Right? Just be like, hey, Hamburg Visitor Center,
Hmm.
you want to publish a book in English of this book that's already published in German. And
Yeah, I think that
like,
that's like that could be done. I think it's
mhm,
just a question of like how many government officials or how many officials involved in the tourism bureau are would be receptive to that. I think people always
mhm,
surprise you.
mm,
Um, it can like I do operate on the philosophy of like if you can come up with a plan and you're like I could do this plan. This plan is plausible. I think like and I've thought it through and I don't see why not and ask. Um,
mm.
like I'm thinking like it's like oh man like it would be too much for too much for me, but somebody could go to like the different countries and be like, "Hey, you guys should do a science fiction anthology. You guys should do like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
um
Apply for grants from the government.
yeah.
Yeah.
Grants are do like they can come with strings attached though. Usually
Mhm.
as like Yili Wong was saying about the Canadian grants and why they're not using they didn't apply for one for Tails and Feathers. And that's because the Canadian grants require a certain amount of um, stories to be written
Canadian
by.
authors. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely a frustration.
mhm,
Let's see. So what do we have that makes something good or more difficult to translate? Setting, style.
mhm.
What have we come up with? That have we come up with so far?
Characters, I guess, would be.
Characters. Yeah.
We haven't touched on that one too much, but
Yeah.
mm,
It's one of those things. It's like, oh, I didn't like any of the characters. Well, you weren't supposed to.
yeah, yeah.
I couldn't
Yeah.
identify.
But it's like it's supposed to introduce you to it. That's one thing that like I do get frustrated with it when I'm sending translations around. If I get feedback, it's like I couldn't identify with this story, and like, yes, editorial taste, you can use like, I have definitely used that line before. I try to do it less because I've been becoming more cognizant of, like, how that can impact the authors, especially from marginalized, backgrounds. When you hear that, it's like, well, yeah, you wouldn't identify with that because you're not from there. You didn't have this experience. Um, and with the translated pieces, it's similar because they're like I couldn't identify with the characters. It's like yes, because I'm showing you a new part of the world. I'm showing you a new framework for your brain to look through, a new lens. I
Yeah.
almost said eyeball lens for your brain.
Jeez. Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things that drives me nuts. Because like I don't it's like on a personal level, when I read, I don't understand the I must identify with a character. I must see myself in a character. It's like I don't understand that mindset because that's not how I read. But that's apparently how a lot of people read. But there's
Yeah.
got to be something you can identify with in this person. It's like, oh, this person has a dog. I don't know. I love dogs. Great. I can identify with this person who has a dog because they have a dog and they love dogs, even if they're something completely different. Or they've got a sister. They love their family. They want to do something, and it's like, oh yeah, I understand. There's some sort of into like human feeling that like we all have human feelings.
Yeah, that's the I think that is feeling like the feeling connection is like if the characters you can that's where the connection is, I think, when you're reading translated work or looking to works for translation, you're looking for the human experience in that story somewhere,
Hmm.
right? Like those connections can bridge the difficulties and the linguistic hurdles that you the translator are going to undergo and then that the reader is going to experience not it being in an original language, those it definitely like yeah, the story like I read in The Way Spring Arrives, that anthology, the first story is it's so heartbreakingly beautiful. And it's the premise is that there's a village in China where kids raise stars, and then the stars are once the stars get old enough, they're turned into stardust for the and like used for other tasks and like but the stars get killed. Um
What?
and this one little boy has a star that he's taken and he's teaching it. I think and there's a whole argument about whether the stars are sentient or not too. Um and that like that just pulled on my heartstrings, and that was like it's a first story in that anthology, and it is like such a great pick for like to immerse you into like immerse readers, English speaking readers into a different country, into a different perspective with like with a great speculative angle, and also just like welcome to how bleak things can be. um but
Yeah,
also like that human like there's so much emotion that runs throughout that piece. um that yeah, it really really just pulls you in. um
yeah, yeah. Let's see. Kian suggests popularity. I guess something is screamingly popular in its
mhm.
original language. But I give it a shot in like English or something else.
Yeah,
So,
that would be something that is something I do look at, I guess, because if something's well received in the original language by a lot of people, it's like what you did, exactly what you did with the German or with that award-winning story, choosing to
mhm,
translate that. Like I definitely consider like, even like has the author is the author established? Have they won awards? Are they not established? Do I want to take a gamble? Um, although for I don't know that I don't know how much popularity in the home country really impacts how popular it is
mhm,
here or in English.
yeah,
Um, because
yeah. It's like the girl with the dragon tattoo was really popular in uh, Sweden,
mhm,
yes, and it's a crime drama thing, and people love crime dramas everywhere. So,
mhm.
like, here, we love this crime drama. Let's make it popular everywhere, and then it is.
Yeah, and speculative fiction is already a niche, right? Like crime
Mhm,
drama has a big audience, then you have speculative fiction with the niche, and then within that, translated the demand like translated science fiction is so small. Like
mhm,
the demand for like the demand's growing and and there is demand among readers, but the like when a publisher is looking at whether a work's a good candidate for translation, they are looking for like does it have mass appeal? What's the lowest common denominator? Um, like how likely is this to resonate with readers? And does the style work? Like, is the
mhm.
style going to work with the audiences right now or audiences that we think we're going to have for it in a year or two? Because pulpy stuff, like pulpy style sci-fi, there's not a whole lot in demand from I don't think the big publishers, at least in the US, are looking for like
Mm,
like translated pulpy things. Unless
yeah,
it's like a media tie-in, then they know they can leverage that for like an
yeah,
existing franchise to help promote that.
yeah. And you can like that's the kind of thing that if you want to try, like there's a fairly big self-publishing scene in Germany, and like, okay, do you want to pay me to translate and maybe get your book self-published in English? I'm like, yeah, I'd love to, but I don't have 4,000 euro to pay you because this is self-publishing,
Mhm.
and nobody makes money on that. I mean, it's not true, people do, but
Yeah, it's just the odds are not in your favor.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I picked up a couple of self-published books at the little book fair I went to, but you know, they're fun. I haven't read them yet. I have a large stack of books. It's like
Yeah.
that I need to read in
Yeah.
print, and then of course there's all the ebooks I have to read. And it's like, oh God, I'm never
Mhm.
going to read everything.
Yeah. I went to Spain last year on a mission to acquire a lot of like Spain published science fiction from small presses there because
Mm,
none of that makes it here to the US. None. And I have like a picture of like the big stack of books, and it'll take me a while to like work through everything and like figure out
mm,
what pieces in there those books I want to those anthologies or the novels, which ones I think would be a good like project to take on for myself. But we are at the 50-minute mark.
Yes.
So I
There's
think
any final questions for anyone?
yeah.
Yeah. Is
Um,
translation mainly a labor of love? Yeah. 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 It's kind of the I love the story and I think more people should read it.
mhm. Yeah,
Did save you money?
especially in literary, like I've in the literary sense versus like a not like technical papers or something like you're going like
Hmm.
there's always going to be the market and demand for technical stuff getting translated. Um, that is very dry and would make me very unhappy to do that day in and day out. Um, but like when you're translating like like literary in this sense, it's just fiction or speculative fiction in any sort. Um, yeah, I think a lot of it is a labor of love because there's not a lot of reward out there for translators right now, at least not financially, other than like getting to help build the global community and help
Hmm.
bridge try to bridge differences and try to show different perspectives.
Yeah. Unless, of course, you are a native something else speaker and want to translate things into your native language from
Mhm.
English,
Mhm.
because there's a huge market for that.
Yeah.
You can totally going to any bookstore in any country that's not Anglophone and being like, oh, 80% of these books are translated from English. Great.
Yep. Yep.
It's depressing as fuck. So depressing.
It really is. I think it was Neil Clark said English is like an invasive weed in different
Mhm.
countries.
Yeah.
Yeah, invasive species. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
super depressing.
it is.
It's what we have, unfortunately. And yeah, Neil also said that if something is translated from Spanish or Chinese or whatever into English, it can then get a wider market and then maybe then get translated into something from
Mhm.
Chinese into English and then into Spanish and then into German, then into French and whatever else because oh, it's popular in English. Oh, people like it. Let's do it. English is a huge
Yeah.
language, a huge market.
Yeah.
It's so it's a blessing and a curse in a way.
Yeah. I think there's
It's
always
because
going to be some sort of like lingua franca. Like there's going to always be that. So we're always going to have like some sort of translation happening. Be curious, like in 100 years or 1,000 years, like what's happening? Is there still like
mhm.
has speculative fiction translation? Have we unlocked the secret in 1,000 years?
Okay, wouldn't that be amazing? All right.
Yes.
I guess we should
Um,
probably wrap this up and let them take over the room for the next panel.
yeah. I'll be in the Discord channel for
Mm,
this
mhm.
one. Toast, I think we figured out it was.
Yeah,
Was it?
we're in toast
Yeah. I'll be in there for a little bit and then I'll, I guess we see each other again.
at an hour from now.
Yeah. And we'll
Take an
talk
hour
about
off and
feminist
then come back.
translations.
Yeah, feminist translations. I'm gonna grab my favorite one off the shelf. So,
Yay.
yeah.
Well,
Anywho,
thank you everyone for joining us.
yeah, thanks for coming.
We should also say, where can people find you online if they want to follow you or learn more about like the stuff you do?
My website, cdcovington.com, has links to all my socials, and I'm also on Discord, and I am on Twitter as Exaggerated. I'm almost never on Twitter anymore, and on Mastodon, Exaggerated at wandering.shop.
I am, I have a website, monicaluzon.com, Twitter and Instagram. I have molo_rights. I realize I should have put all of this in the chat earlier. I meant to do that, but 3:30 brain was not having any of that. Um,
There's always a Discord.
yeah, there's the Discord. So if anyone's interested in those, I do have a Mastodon. I'm trying to use that more often. Um, I think it's another Molo rights thing, but I forget if there's an underscore involved. And I think I'm also in the Wandering Shop one, so I'll have to find you. Um, yeah, but all right. Well, thank you.